Hello, beautiful community. You have written to me extensively asking two questions. Quite a few of you have written to me about this, and you are therefore responsible for what's to come in this conversation. I take no response. I take responsibility, of course. Why would Prigozhin be flying over Russian territory and not be aware that Putin would want to assassinate him? Why such naivety? So many of you have asked this. And why would Putin have ordered the assassination of, how would Putin have ordered the assassination of Prigozhin? Like the nuts and bolts of it. And these are actually questions probably best suited for Mark Galeotti, who is a sort of master of responsible speculation. He can speculate in a way that leaves you feeling sharper and more informed at the end, rather than more indulged into loose conspiratorial fantasies. But there are 2 points here, which is why I'm not really blaming you at all. Grateful to receive the questions. One is that I have been giving a psychological account of Putin. Therefore, it's legitimate for some of you to ask me about this. Second, while I've been giving my analysis, because we are a community here, at least we meet, ongoingly as part of this ritual, especially here on the second channel. If you're new, this is our chat channel, the living room situation. For introductory situation, there is the main channel, which is more polished and designed for folks who are new to our conversation as a sort of entry way. But given that, it's legitimate for you to ask, well, Vlad, do you have a placeholder by way of an answer to these questions at least? And if you do, tell us, what is it? What do you think actually happened in terms of how this was instructed to be done? And what do you think happened in Prigozhin's mind? So I'll have a go. And we'll get right into it. So how would Putin have ordered the assassination of Prigozhin is the question. And I think there are 3 possibilities if he ordered it at all, which is the assumption I'm inviting us to partake in. A direct order. And here I don't want to say no, but I want to offer some skepticism. Mr. Putin is an enormously legalistically indulgent personality. He loves speaking legalese, even when he is discussing the possibility of a gangster's act. So this is the sort of guy who would be thinking about nicking the neighbor's TV while talking about how it's understandable that he wants to do that, because after all, the neighbor hasn't been paying his TV license on time, and he's got into trouble twice with the local council 17 years ago. But Mr. Putin, what has that got to do with you nicking the TV? That he's been in trouble with the local council? What's the connection? Well, if you read the documents, have you actually looked at the documents the council sent him? Have you even looked at page 7 of these documents? Do you know what they say? These have been put on my desk, and so on. So what that means is that Putin is unlikely to say, Mr. Navalny, please take him out now by doing X, Y, Z. He's much more likely to say, we've reached a certain stage here where we need to escalate the measures we take really to resolve these problems. And this is really about, securing our stability against malign foreign agents, blah, 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 blah. Do what needs to be done. You have, the remit now, and go ahead. So that kind of roundabout way is more likely, such that if somebody terribly literal-minded read out a transcript, they might think, well, I'm not sure if this guy is guilty, But the trouble is, then the people on the other end of the desk say, yes, we understand. Right? So the first possibility, therefore, is a direct order, and I'm applying a bit of skepticism to that. The second possibility is, I've had it. I've had it with him, and we can take appropriate measures. The third possibility is, I know you've had it, and okay, you can now move on it, right? So get rid of him now, number one. Number two, I've reached a point where I've had enough now. I've reached a point where I've had enough, and I'm just sharing that with you, and whatever the implications of that might be. And the third is, I know you've had enough, and I'm not going to stop you anymore. Now, where is it along that list of three possibilities? I would suggest somewhere between 2 and 3, closer to 2, would be a very speculative, medium confidence guess. What I would say, though, is that up until the mutiny, Mr. Putin would have been sticking up with some recalcitrance for Prigozhin, or at least refusing to act while being pushed to act on it. Right, Mr. Putin, can you grasp that this is a really, really not good situation? And Putin would have been reluctant to take action. We discussed how that situation arises, of course. It's a completely routine scenario for the Putin regime to have presidential powers outsourced to folks in the court who then engage in various activities, conflict with Putin coming in to referee these conflicts. But that same dynamic on a much higher level of intensity and insanity during the war got out of control. But it's possible that for a while, as that propeller was about to fly off the plane or the ship, Prigozhin, the propeller himself, didn't know he was going to fly off until a certain point, and Mr. Putin didn't know he was going to fly off either. Now, why was Prigozhin flying in a private plane over Russian territory, and why didn't he realize that Putin might want to assassinate him? Now, I have a few banal things to say here first, which really aren't my territory, to do with various limitations of capacity. Maybe it was harder for him to organize himself logistically as freely as he would have been able to before. Maybe he was being restricted. Maybe he was being restricted with a view to having all of these people on the same plane and so on. But I'm not going to make any interesting comments about that. So I think Prigozhin would have thought, you have delimited me, you have confiscated some of my realm, you have evicted me, you have amnestied the mutiny, or kind of amnestied the mutiny, but I'm yours. There's a big history there. You need me. What I'm capable of doing for you outweighs in advantage the advantageousness of eliminating me. And I'm still in a position where I'm prepared to do anything you want me to do for you. And I don't have a comment on how far Mr. Prigozhin would have himself thought, oops, I lost the plot there with the mutiny, or whether he'd still be thinking it was kind of a forced action. So that's, I think, the beginning of a process of normalization that Prigozhin would have at least partly gone through, gaining some confidence in the survivability of this enterprise for him. But of course he would have been aware this was on the edge. So we can therefore say that Prigozhin made two mistakes. And the second of the two mistakes is a product of this development of confidence in the normalization of the situation. The first mistake is, of course, this business of this propeller flying off, with the propeller itself experiencing this process as water coming to the boil, where you move from a situation of potentially routine inter-elite conflict. Well, Putin needs somebody there to attack Shoigu and Gerasimov, and now he's going to have to engineer somebody potentially actually into that position, into that role. But eventually that criticism ceased to be criticism and was a public attack on Putin's authority, even short of the mutiny, and then there was the mutiny. So that's Prigozhin's first mistake. And now arguably the second mistake he made was that he did not do anywhere near enough to evaporate. And the prominence of Prigozhin, since Putin's seeming request to Prigozhin to come as close to evaporating as possible, looks problematic. Mr. Venediktov, the ex-editor of Echo Moscow, claims that during the meeting with Wagner, well, he claimed that a couple of people told him this, basically, that during the meeting with Wagner, have no capacity to place a level of trustworthiness on this speculation. But it's because it's not an implausible psychological picture, I'm just going to share it. That Putin spoke past Prigozhin, disregarded Prigozhin, and told the Wagnerites that you have been tricked. You didn't know you were sort of marching against me, but you were marching against me and you've been tricked. And he didn't say exactly who tricked them, but the implication was that that was the character sitting right in front of you there, Mr. Prigozhin, in the front row. So that's a claim that Venediktov has made. And now we really end up with two possibilities. One, that Putin would have been waiting until it was right or safe enough to get rid of Prigozhin, once the Prigozhin myth was sufficiently punctured. And the second possibility is that Putin was trying to not assassinate Prigozhin, whether he was on the bubble about it, and that he judged that Prigozhin's post-mutiny behavior was a lack of compliance with the post-betrayal deal that was proposed to him. So these are the two possibilities that I'm putting on the table. I want to read you, while staying very much in the same waters, a little passage from Vladimir Pastukhov, a Russian commentator. It's a hyperbolic passage, but it ties up constructively with the point that I've been making and I want to make again because it's tremendously important. And now we're back to broader levels of analysis. So here is Mr. Pastukhov's writing yesterday. Now, I appreciate that I'm labeling this hyperbolic, but robustly illuminating. Prigozhin was the quintessence of what Putin really believed in and what he values: naked strength, unbridled deceit, a cruel criminal fraternity in which they execute and pardon according to the code of professional thieves or the criminal world. But Putin was forced to disguise himself all his life, hide behind the mask of a thief in law. And Prigozhin, not without Putin's help, could afford to preach violence openly and live in accordance with his blasphemous preachings. The shadow, Prigozhin, lived in such a way that its owner, Putin, was envious. That's why it, the shadow, disappeared. Why I've fed you this is for the following reason. Part of the story I told about how the mutiny, and also now to some extent the assassination, is a chip on Putin's aura of legitimacy, right? Part of that story, especially as far as it applies to the assassination, that has been misguidedly argued by many commentators to be something that strengthens Putin, or at least misguidedly argued that that's a helpful way in which to repeatedly cast it. And it's not. It's more constructive to see wider patterns of repressive and dramatic actions which are increasingly less controlled. But the way this business of the fragmentation, very partial, but still fragmentation of that aura works in relation to the passage we've just read, is that Putin has essentially assassinated himself here. That's to say, Putin has killed a member of the collective Putin. And that is ineliminably going to be part of how some of the Russian population read this. Now, it's really going to feel like something must be wrong, because why is the bigger chunk of collective Putin needing to get rid of a smaller chunk of collective Putin? What is going on there? When the collective Putin is eating itself, it means things must not be well. Now, there is just as a tiny remark, there is a stat going around on Twitter that only 8% of Russians believe that Mr. Putin ordered the assassination of Mr. Prigozhin. I wouldn't read too much into that, in the sense that obviously that's a request for them to admit that their dictator who has power over them is a killer, in a context that they aren't safe in. And anyway, there's not just a reluctance to say this, but there's a terrible resistance to even thinking this, because there's the feeling that there is no way to take this thought, right? So back to this point about resistance to saying things and resistance to thinking things as opposed to ignorance. But nevertheless, coming out of this little detour, it's important to acknowledge that this is going to be felt as some kind of delimited exercise in this self-immolation of collective Putin. So this is a problem for the regime. Three very quick conclusions. This is not the upper limit of the weirdness you are seeing. The weirdness will escalate. if there is a mutiny next time, number two, the lesson from this, and this is not a unique point, you've heard many others say it, is that if you do it, you should go all the way through with it. And the question that naturally arises in many of you is, well, Vlad, who is planning the next thing? Who might be planning the next thing? And the answer is, it doesn't really work like that. It's not about individuals. There is nobody in Putin's close circle who's planning anything now. I'm very confident of that. Fairly strongly confident of that. But it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work via sort of a mode of planned conspiracy. Rather, situations arise, conflicts arise, dysfunctionality arises, and that produces another propeller that has the propensity to fly off. I'm so sorry I wasn't so articulate today, struggling a little bit with my head, but I hope this brought some value, and I very much look forward to speaking in the next day or two. Lots of love. Bye-bye.